Hello and welcome to World Stories on Viewer Television. I am Deborah Ntukaife. This week we'll take a look at top stories making the rounds from across the globe. Our major headlines in the week under review include Uzbekistan's elections, anti-government protest in Kenya, and North Korea denounced the move by the United States. We'll bring you these stories and more after this short break. Stay with us. Moving forward, South Africa's largest opposition party has teamed up with 6 small groups to build a coalition aimed at ousting the long-ruling ANC in next year's election, they announced Monday. The Democratic Alliance, which has a fifth of the seats in parliament, is in the forefront of the plan. The initiative does not include the third largest party, the radical leftist Economic Freedom Fighters. The leaders of the 7 parties will hold what they dubbed historic talks on August 16th and 17th in Johannesburg to map out a common vision for a new government. The governing African National Congress, which has been in power for nearly 3 decades, is facing growing discontent fueled by a sickly economy, entrenched unemployment, worsening inequality, and electricity crisis. It suffered record losses in the 2021 municipal elections, the first time in the democratic era its supporters dipped below half of ballots cast nationally. Now, Kenya's police fired tear gas on opposition leader Raila Odinga's convoy on Friday as people joined anti-government protests in several cities over a harsh cost of living crisis and a raft of controversial tax hikes. Tear gas was fired on Odinga's motorcade after he addressed the mass rally in the capital Nairobi, and police took similar action to break up protests in Indian Ocean port city of Mombasa and Kisumu, an opposition stronghold on Lake Victoria. Police were out in force for the protest, the latest called by Odinga this year over the policies of the government of President William Ruto. At the rally, Odinga, who lost the close 4th August 2022 election to Ruto, announced plans to collect 10 million signatures in a bid to remove his arch-rival from office. Odinga's Azimio's Alliance had called for the protest over the impact of the new taxes on Kenya's already suffering economic hardship and soaring prices for basic necessities. The Finance Act provides for new taxes or increase on a range of basic goods such as fuel and food and mobile money transfers, as well as controversial levy on all tax-paying Kenyans to fund a housing scheme. Lesotho is a country that has always prided itself on production of wool and mohair until a deadly drought started spreading around 2011 and pinnacled in 2015, increasing the proportion of peoples living below poverty line. In these stories, Sekeleme and his family colleagues established the Sorango Matosho, an association on the recommendation of the Lesotho Highlands Development Authority, and it seems to be working. Let's take a look at the reports.
Ramuroa Sikeleme, a farmer in the Tsana Talana rangelands of southwestern Lesotho, has deepened on wool and more high income for a living for 2 decades. However, in 2011, climate change became a reality for him. Research shows it is a climate crisis that requires immediate attention. Sekeleme and his farming colleagues established the Tsoararang Kamotsho Makahale Grazing Association on the recommendation of the Lesotho Highlands Development Authority.
As we used to, but more importantly, to improve the quality and the quantity, as we're seeing. When we look at production of either wool and mohair, we look at both the individual farmer, but we also now want to look at the country as a whole. Yes.
Sekeleme, who is the group chair, says the association has helped smallholders like him preserve the rangelands since its establishment in 2019. The association has also benefited from a partnership with Lesotho's Wool and Mohai Promotion Project.
So what we are trying to do as a project is to ensure that that individual farmer increases productivity.
The project has also built capacity for the country's weather forecasting department, purchasing ultra-modern forecasting equipment to ensure farmers get accurate information on weather patterns for adequate planning. Before the project, much of the rangelands were strained, making unpalatable species overgrow.
But to also now specifically give them skills of when they plan, they should plan bearing in mind what the weather forecast is saying.
Sekeleme and his farming colleagues acknowledge that they generated higher incomes and more sustainable livelihoods.
Now, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, wheat and barley are the two most important cereal crops in Tunisia. In 2018, the total production of wheat in Tunisia was estimated at 2.3 million metric tons, while the total production of barley was estimated at 0.3 million metric tons. The production of both crops has been increasing over the past few years. Researchers attribute this increase to returning of farmers to indigenous seeds. The report. Let's take a look.
Hassan Chotai, a Tunisian farmer and indigenous seed researcher in Monogoer, is someone who has seen firsthand the disasters brought about by the introduction of modern wheat and barley seeds across the nation. Chotai, who started farming at age 12 on his farmers' and grandparents' farms, saw farmers in his region lose their produce when imported exotic seeds that failed to provide adequate yields when local environmental conditions changed.
الوزارة التونسية عندها فكرة ومتعلمة تعرف المناخ التونسي كما يجب تعريفه بقطع النظر على أن البذور المستوردة ليس لها علاقة بالأوطان متاعنا وبالتالي طبعا تتأثر برشا بالمناخ وتتأثر برشا بالطبيعة.
With the help of the National Gene Bank of Tunisia, Ramzi Chabain, the Director General, says farmers now have access to indigenous seeds that are resistant to biotic stress that affected normal growth, a challenge common in exotic seed species.
La résistance au stress biotique, c'est-à-dire les maladies et ennemis des cultures, la tolérance au stress abiotique, c'est-à-dire les stress abiotiques, la haute température, l'hydromorphie, la sécheresse et ainsi de suite, qui ne cessent d'accentuer avec les changements climatiques. Donc les ressources génétiques autochtones, normalement, elles contiennent des gènes d'adaptation au milieu.
In this case, the indigenous seeds have become a form of gold to the economy, offering to boost not only the coffers but also the health of the nation.
Sont adaptées au changement climatique, elles sont adaptées aussi aux conditions édaphiques au sol dans les régions marginales, elles sont adaptées aux problèmes des changements climatiques, la haute température, l'hydromorphie, la sécheresse et ainsi de suite. Elles contiennent des gènes de résistance aux maladies. Je ne dis pas qu'une seule variété autochtone contient tout ça, mais chaque variété autochtone a son background génétique, a son patrimoine génétique qui permet de trouver, dans ces ressources, on peut identifier des gènes de résistance qui sont utiles aujourd'hui et qui restent.
Beyond using native seeds, Chotoy advocates for climate-smart approaches to counter the effects of climate change.
معناها عنده طريقة وتكون عنده أراضي خاصة ببنك الجينات باش هو يكثر بذور ويبدا هو عارفها ومشرف عليها، مش يعطيها الفلاحة. نجم فلاح تعطيه بذرة كيما هذه وتقول له كثرها ايه، كي غيرها لك، كي بدلها، يعني كيف تعطيه انت نوعية وهو يرجع لك نوعية اخرى. انت شنو مش تعرف؟ ما عندهمش خبرة اللي هي نجم تفرز ما بين الحبة والحبة.
Pope Francis said the burning of the Muslim holy book, the Quran, has made him angry and disgusted as they condemned and rejected permitting the act as a form of freedom of speech. Recall that the man tore up and burned a Quran in Sweden's capital Stockholm last week, resulting in strong condemnation from several states, including Turkey, who's backing Sweden's need to gain entry to the NATO military alliance. While Swedish police have rejected several recent applications for anti-Quran demonstrations, courts have overruled those decisions, saying they infringe freedom of speech. On Sunday, an Islamic grouping of 57 states said collective measures are needed to prevent acts of desecration to the Quran, and international law should be used to stop religious hatred. U.S. President Joe Biden visits Downing Street and was greeted on the steps of number 10 by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. It was the American leader's fifth meeting with Sunak in as many months and sixth overall. The pair shook hands and exchanged smiles as they posed for photographs on the steps of Sunak's residence. A discussion was then held in the garden of Downing Street and lasted just over 40 minutes. Sunak said the pair would continue talks on how the UK and US can strengthen cooperation and joint economic security to the benefit of its citizens. The two men discussed support for Ukraine ahead of tomorrow's NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. Still on issue bordering on United States, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has urged closer communication between China and the United States to improve economic decision-making and challenge China to join global initiatives to help poorer nations address climate change. Yellen's visit through Sunday is Washington's latest attempt to repair some ties between the world's two biggest economies, battered over issues from Taiwan to technology. Despite bilateral tensions, Yellen pointed out that record-high trade last year between the two countries showed there was an ample room to engage in trade and investment. Yellen told Chinese Vice Premier He Lifelong it was critical to focus on areas of common interest and address disagreements through dialogues. Chinese state media described the meeting as in-depth, candid, and pragmatic.
Both sides more fully understand the global economic outlook. Climate change is on the top of the list of global challenges, and the United States and China must work together to address this existential threat.
A U.S. comedian joins two other authors in a lawsuit claiming artificial intelligence was trained on their work without permission. The U.S. comedian and author Sarah Silverman is suing the ChatGPT developer OpenAI and Mark Zuckerberg's Meta for copyright infringement over claims that their artificial intelligence models were trained on her work without permission. Silverman has filed the suit along with the two authors, Christopher Golden and Richard Cardray, in which they claim the AI models developed by OpenAI and Meta used their work as part of their data training. The suit claimed the authors' work were obtained from shadow library sites that have been long used and of interest of the AI training community. North Korea denounced a move by the United States to introduce a nuclear missile submarine to waters near the Korean peninsula, saying it creates a situation that brings a nuclear conflict closer to reality. North Korea also claimed United States reconnaissance planes recently violated its airspace near the East Coast, quoting an unnamed spokesperson of its Ministry of National Defense. The moves by the United States to introduce strategic nuclear assets to the Korean peninsula is a blatant nuclear blackmail against North Korea and regional countries and present a grave threat to peace, KCNA said. The comments come amid tensions between the United States and North Korea as the North has intensified its missile launch in recent months, with some triggering emergency warning system in part of Japan. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg will stay in office for another year, the 31st Nation Military Alliance decided on Tuesday. Stoltenberg said in a tweet that he is honored by NATO allies' decision to extend my term as Secretary General until 1st October 2024. Stoltenberg, a former Norwegian Prime Minister, has been NATO's top civilian official since 2014. His term had been due to expire last year but was extended then to keep a steady hand at the helm after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. United States President Joe Biden and his NATO counterpart had been due to a named successor when they met in Vilnius, Lithuania on July 11th to 12th. But the world's biggest security organization made decision by consensus and no agreement could be found on a new candidate. President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to hold talks with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the latest leg of a tour to push Ukraine's bid to join NATO and secure more weapons from allies. The talks in Istanbul comes on the eve of the 500th day since Russia's invasion, with Zelensky admitting Ukraine's counteroffensive was progressing slowly. He called on the United States and other allies to provide long-range weapons and artillery during a two-day visit to Prague. The talks with Erdogan, an important broker in the conflict, are to focus on expiring deal to ship Ukrainian grain across the Black Sea, as well as next week's NATO summit. But Zelensky and Erdogan want to extend a United Nations and Turkey brokered deal with Russia, under which Ukraine has been allowed to ship grain to global markets during the war. The deal will expire on July 17 unless Russia agrees to its renewal. Turkish President Recep Erdogan says his country might approve Sweden's membership in NATO if European Union nations open the way to Turkey's bid to join the EU. Erdogan publicly linked Sweden's membership in the Western Military Alliance and his country's long-stalled application to become part of the EU for the first time before departing Ankara for a NATO summit that starts Tuesday in Lithuania's capital. He told United States President Joe Biden during a telephone call that Turkey wanted a clear and strong message of support for Turkey's EU ambition from NATO leaders meeting in Vilnius, according to his office. The White House readout of the Biden-Erdogan call did not mention the issue of Turkey membership in the EU. Israeli lawmakers have approved advancing a bill to a preliminary vote that will allow for minors under the age of 14 who are convicted of terrorist-related offenses, including murder or manslaughter, to be jailed. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, War Stories continues.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm at the Envoy Hotel, Diplomatic Drive 305, here for a business weekend. It's been an amazing stay. Conference hall and business facilities here are stylish and innovative. The Envoy Hotel is luxury, esoteric, opulence, for ultimate comfort.
discerning travelers, we are more than just a place to stay. We are an icon of comfort, style, and thoughtful luxury. We are Envoy Hotel.
Two souls came together. Two souls came together. Wherever now.
Tat Fragrance, the new luxury fragrance for men and women.
Welcome back. Israeli lawmakers have approved advancing a bill to a preliminary vote that will allow for minors under the age of 14 who are convicted of terrorist-related offenses, including murder or manslaughter, to be jailed. The bill stipulates that the severity with which we see terrorism and terrorist acts, which exact a toll on life and property, and the fact that these acts of terror are also carried out by minors requires a severe approach. According to Hart, it comes after a similar temporary order expired 3 years ago, which permitted Israeli authorities to imprison children over the age of 14 accused of murder. The bill's explanatory text states that it proposes to turn the unextended temporary order into a permanent one while limiting it only to manslaughter offenses committed in the course of acts of terror, but also expanding it in the sense that the court may sentence a minor under 14. At least 50 people, including 8 children, have been killed by floods and landslides triggered by monsoon rains that have lashed Pakistan since last month, officials said on Friday. The summer monsoon brings South Asia 70 to 80% of its annual rainfall between June and September every year. It is vital for the livelihoods of millions of farmers and food security in a region of around 2 billion people, but also brings a landslide and floods. Majority of the deaths were in eastern Punjab province and were mainly due to electrocution and building collapses, official data showed. Meanwhile, the Meteorological Department has predicted more heavy rainfall nationwide in the days ahead and warned of potential flooding in the catchment areas of Punjab major rivers. However, the province's disaster management authorities said Friday it is working to relocate people living along the waterways. 4 people were killed and 2 children were wounded in a shooting in the southeast Philadelphia, police said. 3 firearms were recovered after the incident, which police said took place in the city's largely residential King Session area. The suspect was identified by law enforcement as a 40-year-old man. A person in custody is believed by authorities to have obtained a gun and returned fire at the shooter. Police initially reported that 8 people had been shot, but Police Commissioner Daniel Outlaw said to reporters that evening, later on that day, were 6 victims. Authorities have not established a motive. The deceased were 20, 22, and 59 years old, and one of the dead has not been identified, Outlaw said. The United Nations Human Rights Council will hold an urgent session to address the burning of the Quran following an incident in Stockholm that sparked global outrage, a spokesman said. A Quran was burnt outside the Swedish capital main mosque, triggering a diplomatic backlash across the Muslim world. Salwan Momika, who fled from Iraq to Sweden several years ago, stomped on the Muslim holy book and set several pages alight as Muslims around the world began marking the Eid al-Adha holiday as the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia was drawing to a close. The Geneva-based United Nations Human Rights Council, which is meeting in session until July 14, will change its agenda to stage an urgent debate following a request from Pakistan.
Council will hold an urgent debate to, quote unquote, discuss the alarming rise in premeditated and public acts of religious hatred as manifested by current desecration of the Holy Quran in some European and other countries.
Seven people were wounded, four of them seriously, in a car ramming and stabbing terror attack in northern Tel Aviv on Tuesday afternoon, police and medics said. According to police, the Palestinian assailant rammed his pickup truck into people on a sidewalk on Pinchas Rosen Street in the city, then got out and stabbed others. He was shot dead by an armed civilian. Police spokesman Eli Levy said the incident was a terror attack. Four of the victims were listed in serious and moderate to serious condition, the nearby Ichlov and Berlin hospitals said. Another three were listed in moderate and good to moderate condition. One person was also brought to Ichlov after suffering acute anxiety. A fire at retirement home in the early hours of Friday in Milan killed 6 people, firefighters said, with numerous residents hospitalized. The 3-story building was reportedly housing 167 people when the fire started. Over 10 ambulances, various fire trucks, and a silver mortuary van could be seen outside the building in the south of the Italian city. Milan Mayor Giuseppe Sala said the fire started in one room housing 2 female residents, both of whom were killed by the flames. The cause of the blaze was not yet known, the fire brigade said. And 4 assailants were killed Saturday after blasting their way into an Iranian police compound, leaving 1 officer dead in the southeastern province of Sistan Baluchistan near the Pakistani border, state media said. And according to the province's deputy head of security, Alireza Maramati, the attackers used grenades to blast open the gates of the police station and exchange fire occurred. The Quds Force, in charge of Operation Abroad for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, said the attack involved 4 terrorists, all of whom were killed in the clash, the IRNA state news agency reported. Iranian police said did not give details of casualties in that incident, but local news agencies Mera reported 1 Iranian border guard had been killed. Afghanistan's ruling Taliban said 1 person was killed on each side. One person has died and 7 were missing after a landslide overtook a highway construction site on an expressway in central China, local government officials said on Sunday. Now 6 people were found alive and injuries were reported from Saturday's landslide, officials in Hubei province said in a post on the province's WeChat account, adding they were trying to prevent other disasters in the area as operations continued. China's Ministry of Emergency Management activated a level 4 emergency response and sent a working group to the site to guide emergency landing. The Minister of Emergency Management urging authorities to out what caused the landslide, and China's government has issued advisories about rain and other natural disasters for local government to stay alert and respond quickly. President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed brave Ukraine on the 500th day of Russia's invasion on Saturday as the war tolls mounted with 6 deaths reported in Russia's rocket fire. Zelensky published on social media an updated video clip of a visit to Snake Island in the Black Sea, a symbol of Ukraine's defiance against Russia. Finishing a trip to Turkey on Saturday, Zelensky prayed for the victims of the war alongside Patriarch Bartholomew, the leader of the world's Orthodox, after a regional tour to drum up support ahead of a NATO summit next week. The United Nations has documented 9,000 civilian deaths since the start of the war in February 24, 2022, including 500 children, although it estimates the real toll could be significantly higher. Russian President Vladimir Putin is turning to a familiar playbook in shoring up his authorities, a smear campaign against Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner Group military leader, who led a brief mutiny against the Kremlin. The Putin has directed the state to dismantle the Wagner business empire, including its military internet troll farms and gold and other mineral mining operations on the African continent. A Russian state media report published what it said were images from a police raid on one of Prigozhin's palatial homes in St. Petersburg, pointing out weapons, cash, gold bricks, wigs, and multiple passports in a space filled with ornate furnishing, an indoor pool, and helicopter pad outside. Those kinds of moves were meant to discredit Prigozhin's image among the public, who see him as a warrior on the front line of Russia's war in Ukraine, who has called out Russia's general as incompetent and corrupt. While Kremlin initially said criminal charges against Prigozhin would be dropped in exchange for him taking exile in Belarus, the mercenary group leader appears to be in Russia. Now, polls have opened in Uzbekistan, where President Shavkat Mirziyoyev is likely to secure a third term as head of state. Polling stations opened at 8 a.m. and closed at 8 p.m. with about 220 million Uzbeks eligible to vote in Central Asia's most populous country. The snap election comes months after a constitutional referendum paved the way for Mirziyoyev to serve 2 more presidential terms and increased the tenure from 5 to 7 years. The change means the 65-year-old incumbent could stay in power until 2037. Mirziyoyev served as prime minister under his hardline predecessor Islam Karimov before winning his first term in 2016 and getting re-elected in 2021. Thousands of Israelis blocked traffic and snailed movement at the country's main international airport, the latest mass demonstration over Benjamin Netanyahu's contentious planned judicial overhaul that has divided the nation. Netanyahu's government, pushed to pass several overlapping reforms to the country's judiciary, have plunged Israel into an unprecedented crisis and divided an already highly polarized country. Protesters waving Israel's blue and white national flag and glowing horns blocked the main thoroughfare outside Ben Gurion's airport's main terminal and demonstrated inside the arrival halls. Police said officers and officers were arrested, at least 4 people, for public disturbance. Netanyahu and his ultra-nationalist and ultra-orthodox political allies are pressing ahead with plans to pass several contentious changes to Israel's judicial system after attempts to reach a compromise with opposition lawmakers disintegrated. And that's all on World Stories. Many thanks for watching. I am Deborah Ndukaife. Please stay tuned and enjoy the rest of our programs.